The Alpha King had finally chosen his future queen until the woman he once rejected walked through the palace gates with 2 children who carried his wolf in their eyes. Blackmere Citadel stood beneath a sky the color of iron, its towers wrapped in silver banners, its courtyard packed with nobles, warriors, and council elders waiting to witness a perfect royal departure. Alpha King Theron Blackmere was leaving for the northern Pax with Lady Seris Wycliffe on his arm, the woman chosen by the court to become his queen. She looked flawless beside him, pale gold hair pinned beneath a pearl veil, white cloak untouched by the falling snow, one gloved hand resting lightly on his sleeve, as if she had already claimed the crown, the kingdom, and the man. Theron did not smile. He rarely did. He stood tall in black royal armor, dark hair brushing his collar, golden eyes cold enough to quiet any room before he entered it. Around him, horses stamped nervously. Guards lowered their gazes. Even the wind seemed careful near him. The royal carriage waited at the foot of the steps, its door open, its crest gleaming beneath the gray morning light. The High Elder raised his staff and announced, "Northlaw Kingdom sends its blessing to Alpha King Theron and his future Luna Queen." The court applauded. Lady Seris tilted her chin, accepting the sound like a birthright. Then the outer gate groaned open. The applause died one pair of hands at a time. A woman stood beyond the archway with snow caught in the hood of her worn blue cloak. She was slender, pale from winter travel, her brown hair braided over one shoulder, her face tired but unbroken. In each hand, she held a child. Twin pups, no older than 4, stood pressed close to her skirts. The boy lifted his head first. His eyes flashed gold. Not soft amber. Not ordinary wolf gold. Royal Blackmere gold. The kind painted on the old war banners. The kind every wolf in that courtyard had feared for generations. The girl beside him did not speak, but the moment she breathed in, every horse in the courtyard backed away. A low, startled growl rolled through the line of royal guards, not from anger, but recognition. Theron went completely still. Beneath his armor, something ancient slammed against his ribs. His wolf woke so violently that the torches along the steps flickered blue. Lady Seris felt it too. Her fingers tightened on his sleeve. "My king," she whispered, sharp enough for only him to hear, "keep walking." But Theron could not move. His gaze locked on the children, then rose to the woman holding them. Maren Ashvale. The name struck him harder than any blade ever had. 5 years gone. 5 years buried beneath duty, silence, and a rejection he had convinced himself was necessary. She should have looked defeated. She did not. She stood before the kingdom that had erased her, holding 2 small lives behind her like they were worth more than every crown in the world. A murmur spread through the court. Is that her? The rejected mate? She should not be alive. Maren heard every word. She did not bow. She did not beg. She only tightened her grip around the twins and looked straight at Theron. "I did not come to ruin your wedding journey," she said, her voice calm, though the snow trembled around her boots. "I came because someone is hunting my children." Lady Seris stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Your children are not a royal concern." The little girl flinched at Seris's voice, and the boy bared tiny teeth, placing himself in front of his sister. Theron's wolf answered with a deep, thunderous growl that rolled across the courtyard and shook snow from the stone lions above the gate. Every noble froze. Every guard stepped back. Theron pulled his arm out of Seris's grasp. Slowly, as if one wrong movement might shatter the world, he descended the steps toward Maren and the twins. Maren moved the children behind her. "Do not come closer," she said. A king could have commanded. An alpha could have claimed. Theron did neither. He stopped 10 feet away, breathing like a man standing on the edge of a truth he was terrified to touch. The boy peeked around Maren's cloak, and his scent reached Theron through the cold air, wild cedar, moonlit steel, and the unmistakable fire of Blackmere blood. Theron's face changed. Not with rage. Not with pride. With heartbreak. He looked at Maren, voice rough and barely controlled. "How old are they?" Maren's eyes glistened, but she did not let a tear fall. old enough to know when a wolf is lying to himself. The courtyard held its breath. Then the little girl reached from behind Maren and pointed at the royal crest on Theron's chest. The silver wolf emblem began to glow beneath her tiny finger. Theron staggered back half a step, and for the first time in 5 years, the mate bond inside his soul pulled toward Maren like it had never been broken. Lady Seris went white. The High Elder dropped his staff, and Theron whispered the words that turned the entire kingdom silent. That scent is mine. 5 years earlier, Maren Ashvale had stood in that same courtyard with nothing but a torn Luna veil in her hands and a kingdom waiting to watch her break. Back then, the snow had fallen just as softly, but every flake felt like ash. She had been 21, newly bonded by fate to Alpha King Theron Blackmere, not yet crowned as Luna, not yet trusted by the court, but already hated by those who saw an orphan border girl standing too close to the throne. The elders called her lucky. The noble women called her temporary. Lady Seris Wycliffe, smiling from the front row in pearls and white silk, called her a charming mistake, where everyone could hear. Maren had learned to keep her spine straight long before she entered Blackmere Citadel. Her father had died guarding the Ravenholt border. Her mother had been a healer with moonlit hands and too many secrets. Maren grew up knowing that poor wolves were expected to be grateful for scraps, quiet under insult, and invisible beside power. But Theron had once looked at her as if she were neither poor nor invisible. He had found her in the old chapel after the mate bond first sparked between them, his golden eyes stunned, his voice low with disbelief. "It is you," he had whispered. For 3 weeks, Maren believed fate might be kinder than bloodline. Then the evidence appeared. A stolen defense map hidden beneath her pillow. A broken royal seal found in her satchel. A letter written in her hand, promising Blackmere gates to a rogue army. Maren had never seen the letter before, but the ink carried her scent, and in a kingdom ruled by wolves, scent was treated like truth. Theron had not shouted when they dragged her before Moonveil Court. That was worse. He stood on the throne steps with his face carved from winter, every inch the king, every inch the stranger. Maren Ashvale, the High Elder declared, "You are accused of betraying the royal bloodline." She looked only at Theron. "Ask your wolf," she said. "He knows me." For one heartbeat, something broke through his cold expression. His hand curled against his chest, as if the bond had pulled hard enough to hurt. Then Lord Edric Vane stepped forward, calm and polished, placing one more lie at Theron's feet. "Your Majesty, if you choose her, the Western Pax will call it weakness. If you reject her, the kingdom survives." Maren waited for Theron to fight. He had faced armies. He had silenced alphas twice his age. He had made mountains of men lower their eyes. But that day, with the court watching and the throne hanging over him like a blade, Theron chose the crown. "I reject the bond," he said. The words struck without touching her. Maren felt the world tilt, but she did not fall. She would not give Lady Seris the pleasure. She would not give the elders her knees. She only lifted her chin and answered, "I accept your rejection. I will not beg a king who already decided I was guilty." No one knew that beneath her hand, hidden under the folds of her cloak, 2 tiny heartbeats had already begun to echo inside her. No one knew she left Blackmere carrying the heirs they would have used, owned, or destroyed. For 5 years, she raised Corin and Mara beyond the Ravenholt border, in a cottage so small the wind could shake it, with moufern smoke to hide their scent and old lullabies to quiet their wolves. She mended clothes for coin, healed sick pups for bread, and slept with one ear open because hunters came twice before the twins could walk. She taught Corin courage without cruelty. She taught Mara silence was not weakness. And every night, when the children asked why their father was only a shadow in their blood, Maren told them the safest truth she could. He is far away, now standing again. Before Blackmere Citadel, Maren felt that old pain rise like cold water around her ribs. Lady Seris looked at the glowing crest, then at the silent court, and her perfect smile sharpened. "Any woman," she said sweetly, "can teach a child to mimic royal scent." Maren did not move. Corin squeezed her hand. Mara pressed closer to her cloak. Theron's golden eyes darkened, his wolf still staring through him at the twins. Then Seris lifted her chin and spoke loud enough for every noble to hear. Before this kingdom believes a disgraced woman, let her prove those children are not a trick. The most dangerous thing in Blackmere Citadel was not the Alpha King losing control, it was the moment he chose not to. Lady Seris's accusation hung over the courtyard like a blade made of ice. Nobles leaned forward. Guards held their breath. The High Elder's hand trembled around his staff because everyone knew what should have happened next. A king challenged in front of his court should command. An alpha doubted before his people should dominate. A man faced with children carrying his scent should step forward and claim what was his. Theron Blackmere did none of those things. His golden eyes stayed fixed on Corin and Mara, but his boots remained planted in the snow. Every muscle in his body looked carved from restraint. Maren saw the fight inside him. She felt it in the air, in the way the torches bent toward him, in the way every lesser wolf in the courtyard lowered its gaze without being told. His wolf was not calm. It was pacing beneath his skin, furious, wounded, and desperate to reach the two small heartbeats that smelled like home. Corin pressed himself against Maren's side, trying to look brave with his tiny jaw set and his little shoulders squared. Mara hid half behind her mother's cloak, her silver-gray eyes wide and watchful. Maren's palm rested gently on their backs. She had spent years teaching them that fear was not shameful, but surrender was a choice. "Prove it," Seris repeated, her voice smooth enough to sound reasonable. "If these children carry royal blood, then they will answer to the royal wolf." A ripple moved through the crowd. It was an old test, cruel in its simplicity. Royal pups were expected to bow to the Alpha King's wolf by instinct. If Corin and Mara stepped toward Theron, Seris would call it proof he owned them. If they recoiled, she would call it proof Maren lied. Maren understood the trap before anyone explained it. Her chin lifted. "My children are not court animals trained for your entertainment." Seris's smile tightened. "Then you refuse the test." "I refuse your version of it." The courtyard went silent. Theron looked at Maren then, really looked at her, and for a moment the years between them fell away. He saw the exhaustion beneath her courage, the frost on her lashes, the way her cloak was patched at the hem, the way her body angled toward danger before the children even knew danger had moved. She had not come to Blackmere for pity. She had come standing between the throne and two lives she had protected with nothing but stubborn love and a mother's instinct. Theron took one step forward. Maren's voice cut through the cold. "Stop." His entire court stiffened. No one ordered the Alpha King to stop. But Theron stopped. Not because she outranked him. Because the fear in Corin's eyes hit him harder than any command. Slowly, Theron lowered himself to one knee in the snow, 10 feet away from them. Gasps spread through the nobles like breaking glass. Lady Seris went pale. The Alpha King of Northlaw did not kneel in his own courtyard. Theron kept his hands open at his sides. "I will not touch them," he said, voice low and rough. "Not unless they choose it." Maren's heart twisted so sharply she almost hated him for sounding like the man she had once loved. Corin stared at him, suspicious and shaking with the effort not to hide. "Why does your wolf sound like mine?" the boy asked. The question broke something in Theron's face. Before he could answer, Mara stepped out from behind Maren. Small, silent, brave in a way that made the entire court lean closer. She walked 3 tiny steps through the snow, stopped beyond Theron's reach, and lifted her hand toward the glowing crest on his chest. Theron did not move. He barely breathed. The silver wolf emblem brightened, not with fire, but with moonlight soft and ancient. Then a second glow appeared beneath Mara's sleeve, circling her wrist like a hidden birthmark waking from sleep. The High Elder made a sound of disbelief. Lord Edric Vane, standing near the council steps, suddenly stopped smiling. Maren saw his reaction and went cold. The mark on Mara's wrist was not only Blackmere. It was the sealed crest from the night Maren was accused. Theron saw it too. His eyes lifted to Edric, and his voice dropped into a darkness the whole kingdom felt. "Who put my royal seal on my daughter?" The royal seal on Mara's wrist changed everything, because no child could fake a mark only the throne had the right to awaken. Lord Edric Vane recovered faster than the rest of the court, his gray eyes narrowing for one breath before his face returned to polished concern. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the child is frightened." Strange marks can appear under stress, especially in pups with unstable wolf blood. Maren turned toward him so sharply that Corin grabbed her cloak. She remembered that voice from 5 years ago, calm as winter glass, while her life was being buried under lies. Theron rose from the snow, and the courtyard seemed to shrink around him. "You will not speak of her blood again until I command it." Edric bowed, but his jaw tightened. Lady Seris stepped beside him, her white cloak bright against the dark stone. "Then we need order, not emotion. Bring the children inside. Let the Moonveil Court examine them properly." Maren's arms went around the twins at once. "No one examines my children like evidence." Theron looked at her, and the force in his eyes softened into something almost unbearable. "Then tell me what you will allow." The question stunned the courtyard more than his growl had. A king asking permission. An alpha waiting for the woman he once rejected to decide the terms. Maren swallowed the ache rising in her throat. "Moonwater. Royal crest. Scent circle. No blades. No chains. No hands on them unless they agree." "Done," Theron said. Seris inhaled as if he had struck her pride in front of everyone, but Theron did not look away from Maren. "You and the children will stay in the East Wing until the right. My guards will answer to you." Maren almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because once she had slept in that wing as his future Luna, and then she had been dragged from it as a traitor. "I do not want your pity." "You do not have it," he said quietly. "You have my protection." She hated the way those words still reached something broken inside her. The East Wing had not changed enough. The same arched windows watched the frozen gardens. The same silver lamps burned with moon oil. In the chamber prepared for her, a folded blue shawl rested at the foot of the bed, old and familiar, patched at one corner where Maren had mended it years ago while waiting for Theron to return from War Council. She stared at it too long. Theron noticed. "I kept it," he said from the doorway. "I do not know why." Maren did not turn around. "Because guilt has hands. It holds what grief cannot bury." The room fell silent. Corin sat near the fire, pretending not to watch Theron while polishing a carved wooden wolf he kept in his pocket. Mara leaned against Maren's side, small fingers still covering the glowing mark beneath her sleeve. After a moment, Theron lowered himself onto a chair across the room, far enough not to frighten them. "May I ask their names?" Maren hesitated. The children looked at her, waiting. She gave one small nod. "Corin," the boy said, lifting his chin. "And that is Mara. She does not talk when she does not trust people." Theron's mouth tightened with pain, but he accepted it. "Then I will earn silence before I ask for words." Corin studied him. "Are you the wolf in my dreams?" Maren went still. Theron did too. Before he could answer, the door opened and Lady Seris entered with 2 maids carrying trays of warm milk, sweet bread, and silver toys. Her smile was gentle enough to fool anyone who had never survived a beautiful enemy. "Poor little ones," Seris murmured. "You must be exhausted. Perhaps I should sit with them while Maren rests." Corin's eyes flashed gold. Mara's hand clenched in Maren's skirt. Theron stood. "They stay with their mother." Seris's smile cracked for half a second. "Of course, my king." That night, after the court lamps dimmed and snow whispered against the glass, Maren woke to Mara trembling beside her. The little girl's eyes were closed, but a low, frightened whimper slipped from her throat. Across the citadel, somewhere beyond stone walls and locked doors, Theron woke at the same instant with his hand over his heart. He heard Mara's voice inside his wolf bond, small and terrified, whispering one word from a memory she should not have. "Seal." By sunrise, the entire citadel knew the little princess had spoken a word no child should have known, and by noon, Moonveil Court gathered beneath the glass dome where royal bloodlines had been judged for 300 years. Maren walked in with Corin on her left and Mara on her right, her back straight though every noble stare pressed against her like winter stone. Theron stood beside the moonwater basin at the center of the hall, dressed in black without a crown, as if he had chosen not to hide behind it. Lady Seris stood with the council, pale and perfect, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles showed white through her gloves. Lord Edric Vane watched from the second step below the elders, his face calm, but Maren noticed he would not look at Mara's wrist. The rite was simple, ancient, and impossible to bribe. A silver bowl of moonwater rested beneath the open dome. Around it, a scent circle had been drawn with crushed moufern, cedar ash, and powdered pearl. No one would touch the children. No one would force them. The circle would answer only what the wolves already knew. The High Elder lifted his staff. Corin Ashvale, step forward if you choose. Corin looked up at Maren. She bent close and whispered, "You do not have to be brave for anyone but yourself." He nodded, small but stubborn, and stepped into the circle. The moonwater stirred before he even reached the basin. Theron's breath caught. Golden light rose from the bowl, threading through the air like living smoke, curling around Corin's shoulders without touching him. The royal crest on Theron's armor answered, glowing brighter with every second. A sound moved through the court, half gasp, half prayer. The High Elder's voice shook. Blackmere blood confirmed. Corin did not smile. He only looked at Theron and asked, "Does that mean you believe my mother now?" The question struck harder than any accusation. Theron looked at Maren, and the regret in his eyes was so raw she had to look away first. Then Mara stepped into the circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Seris exhaled softly, almost with relief. Then the moonwater turned silver-white, and the entire dome above them filled with reflected stars though it was midday. The scent circle lifted from the floor like a ring of pale fire. Mara's wrist mark appeared again, but this time another symbol bloomed beneath it, a crescent crown wrapped in twin wolf tails. The High Elder stumbled back. That is not only Blackmere. Edric's calm finally cracked. Old markings can be misread. Theron's voice cut across the hall. Then read it correctly. The Elder swallowed. Moon-crowned bloodline. It appears only when a true mate bond is severed by false judgment and carried forward through innocent heirs. The court went silent so completely Maren heard Mara's tiny breath hitch. True mate bond. False judgment. Innocent heirs. Every word reopened the night Theron had rejected her. Theron stepped toward the basin, but stopped before entering the circle. If the bond was true, why did I stop feeling her? The moonwater answered before the Elder could. It darkened, then revealed an image beneath the surface, a royal seal pressed into black wax, a council chamber, Maren's name written on a forged letter, and a hand wearing a silver signet ring. Maren recognized that ring. So did Theron. Lord Edric Vane slowly backed one step away from the light. The moonwater rose higher, forming the scent of cedar ash, cold iron, and the sharp spice of Edric's wolf. Theron turned toward him, golden eyes burning with a grief that had become something far more dangerous. You sealed my mate bond. Edric bowed his head, but his mouth curved faintly. Your Majesty, you may want to ask who gave me permission. At that exact moment, Lady Seris dropped her white handkerchief, and stamped in the corner was the same crescent crown that glowed on Mara's wrist. The handkerchief fell like a snowflake, but the symbol stitched into its corner struck the court like thunder. For one breath, Lady Seris forgot how to smile. Then she stepped forward, pale lashes lowered, voice soft enough to sound wounded. That crest belongs to every noble house that once served the Mooncrown line. You cannot accuse me because of embroidery. Lord Edric Vane lifted his hands as if surrendering to reason, not guilt. Your Majesty, grief is twisting this room. The rite proved the children carry royal blood, yes. It did not prove Maren Ashvale is innocent of ambition. Maren felt the court shift. It was subtle, but she knew that sound. Silk moving. Boots turning. Wolves choosing the safer side. 5 years ago, they had done the same thing. Edric continued, each word placed with careful poison. She hid royal heirs for years. She arrived on the very morning you were to depart with your promised queen. She allowed the children to awaken bloodline marks in front of every allied pack. Is that a mother seeking safety, or a woman staging a claim to the throne? Corin growled, small and furious. Maren laid a hand on his shoulder before Theron could move. "Do not answer dirt with your teeth," she whispered. "Stand taller than it." The boy swallowed hard and obeyed. That single act silenced more nobles than shouting would have. Lady Seris pressed one gloved hand to her chest. A true Luna would never keep children from their father. The sentence hit the room exactly where she wanted it to. Theron flinched. Maren saw it, and something inside her cooled. Not because she did not understand his pain, but because she had carried pain alone while still keeping 2 children alive. A true father, Maren said, her voice steady, would have asked why the woman he rejected vanished with no trial, no grave, and no scent trail left behind. Theron's joy tightened. His wolf pushed through the air, dark and restless, but he did not silence her. He let the word stand. Edric bowed his head slightly. "Then let the court decide custody of the heirs until this confusion is resolved." The word custody made Mara hide behind Maren's cloak. Theron's eyes flashed. "No one separates them from their mother." "Then you choose her over the kingdom?" Seris asked. The whole court waited. That was the trap. If Theron defended Maren, he looked ruled by an old bond. If he hesitated, he wounded her again. Maren saved him from the choice. She lifted Mara into her arms and took Corin's hand. "I am leaving." Theron turned sharply. "Maren." His voice held the command of an alpha, but beneath it was a man afraid to lose what he had just found. She looked at him once, and the bond between them pulled so hard her breath almost broke. "I came for truth. I found politics." "Stay," he said, lower this time. "Not in order." A plea he barely knew how to make. Maren shook her head. "My children are not pieces on your council floor." She walked out of Moonveil Court with every eye on her and both twins close against her side. No guard stopped her because Theron raised one hand and held his kingdom still. In the East Wing, Maren packed only what mattered: the wooden wolf, the move fern pouch, warm cloaks, and the small healer's knife her mother had left her. Corin tried to look brave. Mara did not speak at all. Snow had begun falling harder by the time they reached the side gate. Behind them, Blackmere Citadel glowed like a palace built from regret. Maren did not look back until Corin's hand slipped from hers. He swayed once, then dropped to his knees in the snow. "Mama," he whispered, confused more than scared. Maren caught him before he fell forward. His skin had gone cold, and beneath his sleeve, a silver mark was spreading around his wrist, bright as moonlight and shaped like a locked crown. From the trees beyond the gate, a hidden wolf call answered the mark. By the time Theron returned to Moonveil Court, the storm had followed him inside. Snow melted from his black cloak onto the marble floor, royal wolves filled the archways behind him, and every noble who had whispered against Maren went silent when they saw Corin in his arms and Mara holding her mother's hand. Theron had not taken the boy from Maren. Corin had reached for him after the locked crown on his wrist dimmed, and even then, Theron carried him like something sacred, not something claimed. Lady Seris stood near the throne in her white veil, pale and perfect, but her eyes went straight to Mara. Lord Edric Vane was beside the council steps, his expression smooth until Theron dropped a torn hunter's order onto the floor. The parchment slid across the marble and stopped at Edric's boots. "Read it," Theron commanded. No one moved. The High Elder bent with shaking hands and lifted the order. His voice broke halfway through. "Secure the heirs before dawn. Use the activated seal if the boy resists. Deliver them to the Eastern Tower." A murmur spread like fire. Theron's gaze cut to Seris. "The Eastern Tower is yours." Seris lifted her chin. "A forged order proves nothing." Maren stepped forward before Theron could answer. Her cloak was torn from the forest, her hair windblown, her face pale with exhaustion, but she looked more like a queen than any woman in silk. "Then let Mara speak." Seris laughed softly. "The child barely speaks at all." Mara looked up at Maren. Maren knelt and brushed snow from her daughter's sleeve. "Only if you choose to, little moon." The whole court watched as Mara walked to the moonwater basin. She was small enough that the marble rim reached her chest, but when she placed the wooden wolf beside it, the water turned silver white. "The lady in the veil opened the seal," Mara whispered. "She said if father remembered mother, she would lose the crown." The basin answered the truth. An image rose in the moonwater, Seris in the eastern tower, pressing the old royal seal into black wax while Edric stood behind her. Then another image appeared, 5 years older, Maren's forged letter on a council table, Seris's white-gloved hand placing it beneath Theron's war map. The court froze. Seris stepped back. "I was protecting the kingdom." Theron's voice was quiet, and that made it terrifying. "You were protecting a crown that was never yours." Edric tried to speak, but the royal wolves at the archways lowered their heads, and his words died before leaving his mouth. The High Elder turned toward Maren, his face gray with shame. One by one, the nobles followed. They bowed. Not to Theron. To her. The woman they had called liar. The mother they had called ambitious. The rejected mate who had walked into their court with nothing but 2 children and the truth. Theron descended from the throne steps and stopped before Maren. Then, in front of every pack banner, every elder, and the woman he had almost married, he lowered himself to one knee. A gasp moved through Moonveil Court. He held out the Luna crown, but he did not push it toward her. "I failed you as a mate," he said, his voice rough enough to cut. "I failed you as a king. I will not ask you to forget that. I will only ask for the chance to make the truth louder than my mistake." Maren looked down at him, feeling the mate bond tremble between them, wounded but alive. Corin slipped his small hand into hers. Mara leaned against her side. For 5 years, Maren had dreamed of being believed. She had never dreamed the court would kneel while Theron Blackmere waited for her answer. She did not touch the crown. Not yet. Her voice carried through the hall, calm and unbreakable. "Before I choose anything, you will tell them what happened the night you rejected me." Theron stayed on one knee, but the silence around him felt heavier than any throne. For 5 years, Moonveil Court had known only the clean version of his rejection, the version written by elders, sealed by council law, and repeated until guilt sounded like justice. Now Maren stood before him with their children at her sides, and the truth he had buried rose like winter breaking through stone. Theron lowered the Luna crown and looked at the court. "The night I rejected Maren Ashvale, I felt the bond tearing inside me before I spoke the words." A shiver moved through the nobles. "I told myself it was proof of betrayal. I told myself a true mate would not survive the pain if she were innocent. That was a lie I used because I was afraid." Lady Seris's face tightened. Lord Edric looked toward the doors, but the royal wolves blocked every archway. Theron continued, each word rough but clear. "The Western Pacts threatened war. The council warned me that choosing her would fracture the kingdom. Edric placed forged evidence in my hand. Seris stood beside my advisors and told me mercy would make me weak. But the final choice was mine. I chose the crown over the woman fate gave me. I let her walk out carrying our children without knowing she carried them, and for that, the shame belongs to me." No one breathed. Maren had imagined this moment so many times during cold nights on the border, but in every dream she had shouted, cried, demanded the world give back what it stole. Now she only felt tired, and beneath the tiredness, something softer. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first warm crack in 5 years of ice. Corin looked up at Theron. "Are you still afraid?" Theron turned to his son, and his golden eyes filled with a gentleness the court had never seen. "Yes." Corin frowned. "Of what?" Theron looked at Maren. "Of being too late." Mara stepped forward and touched the Luna crown with one small finger. The silver did not flare this time. It warmed, glowing like moonlight through snow. Maren placed a hand over Mara's shoulder, then faced the court. "If I remain, my children will not be used as banners for your politics. No noble house will claim them. No council will separate them from me. Every mother in the border packs who raises a child alone will be protected by royal law. And Seris and Edric will face public judgment, not private mercy." The High Elder bowed his head. "It will be written." Theron did not hesitate. "It will be enforced." Only then did Maren take the crown from his hands. She did not let him place it on her. She lifted it herself, steady and unshaking, and set it upon her own head. The court bowed lower. Theron rose slowly, stopping close enough for the mate bond to hum between them, but not close enough to demand anything. "Maren," he said quietly, "may I stand beside you?" The question broke her more than any claim could have. She studied the man who had wounded her, the king who had failed her, and the father who had finally learned to wait. Then she reached for his hand. "Beside me," she said. "Not above me." His fingers closed around hers with careful reverence, and the bond between them, scarred but living, spread warmth through the hall. Corin slipped his hand into Theron's other hand. Mara leaned against Maren and whispered, "Father." Theron closed his eyes for 1 second, as if that single word had given him back a kingdom no crown could hold. That night, beneath the first clear moon after the storm, Blackmere Citadel rang with a new oath. Maren Ashvale was named Luna Queen, not because she had been rescued, but because she had survived long enough to return with the truth. Yet as the moon reached its highest point, Corin and Mara lifted their faces and held together. A third mark appeared on both their brows, dark silver and shaped like an eclipsed crown. Far beyond the northern mountains, something answered them. Theron pulled Maren and the twins close, his eyes fixed on the shadow crossing the moon. "Our children were not hidden from my kingdom," he whispered. "They were hidden from something older."